Hey, good evening. Good evening, and thank you all for coming to the first fall event in the Holloway Poetry Series. My name is Cecil Giscombe. I teach poetry here. Along with Jessica Laser and Alex Walton, I curate the fall Holloway Series. This evening, the poetry faculty will share with you some of what we've been up to. Before I do introductions, I'll let you know who's coming to campus later on this season. Ray Armentrout will be here on the 26th of September. That is a Thursday. Soako Nakayasu will read on Monday, the 7th of October. Don Bogan, who is here this evening, will read on Monday, the 28th of October. And Erica Hunt will be the last reader on the 5th of November. That's a Tuesday. Erica Hunt will also give a talk on race and poetics that afternoon at 4 p.m. For the Mixed Blood Project, which is connected to the Holloway Poetry Series. Erica Hunt's reading and all the readings will take place at 6:30 in this very room. The readers for the 2020 Holloway, Spring 2020 Holloway Series include Maggie Zarowski, Julian Brolowski, Sean Bonney, and Lyn Zhu. And in the spring semester, the great poet Fareed Matuk will be in residence as the Holloway lecturer in poetry and poetics. He'll be here all spring. Other happenings this fall include the Very Slight Worry with Sonnets event, a recitation of sonnets on Thursday, October 10th at 5 o'clock in the English Department Lounge. That's Wheeler 330 down the street, down the corridor. For those who wish to contribute, bring a sonnet from any time period by any author to recite from memory if possible, though there is no disdain for those who use a cheat sheet. Saskia Stehouwer, a Dutch eco-poet, author of Free Range, will be reading at 4 p.m. in Moses 223 this Friday the 13th. The Lunch Poems series takes place on the first Thursday of every month in the Morrison Library from 12:10 until 12:50. And the readers for the Morrison series are on the 3rd of October, Jericho Brown will be here. On the 7th, Monica Yoon will be here. And on the 5th of December, Margaret Ross will read. Tonight's readers will include myself, Eric Falci, Geoffrey G. O'Brien, Lyn Hejinian, and John Shoptaw. Now, books by all the readers are available for purchase, thanks to our friends Owen Wilson and Noah Ross from Moe's Books. Eric Falci, who are we? Let's see. Eric Falci. We're gonna read in reverse alphabetical order. We're gonna start with John Shoptaw and end with Eric Falci. The rest of us will fall into the middle somewhere. Eric Falci's teaching and critical writing focuses most centrally on Irish and British poetry since 1945. He's currently co-teaching 2 courses with Lyn Hejinian, one on very contemporary, mostly American literature, the other on sentences. Late Along the Edgelands is his first book of poetry. It's available over there. Lyn Hejinian's long career as a poet has included work as a translator, mostly from contemporary Russian poetry, multiple collaborations, and published volumes of critical prose and of poetry. Her 2 most recent books are Positions of the Sun, the genre of which is yet to be determined, and Tribunal, a trio of serial poems. Both came out earlier this year. Geoffrey G. O'Brien's last 2 collections are People on Sunday and Experience in Groups, both from Wave. He's a professor at the department, and he also teaches in the Prison University Project at San Quentin. John Shoptaw's book, Times Beach, won the Northern California Book Award in Poetry. His long Ovidian poem, Whoa, just appeared in Arion. It has an exclamation point at the end, right? You can read that. And he's included in Republic of Oranges, a new anthology of Chinese and United States eco-poets, just out from Manoa Journal in Hawaii. My most recent book is Border Towns, a book of essays all of which are more or less about poetry. My new and collected poetry book, similarly, which was due out last month, is now due out in February. The book hasn't changed, but I've been told that there's heavy traffic at the publishers. Okay. So the first reader, we're going to go in reverse order. John Shoptaw, followed by Geoffrey O'Brien, followed by Lyn Hejinian, followed by me, and ending up with Eric Falci. And so please, welcome to the stage, Mr. John Shoptaw.
Hey everyone, I'm very happy to be here. Thought I would begin at a beginning, at least, with the Garden of Eden poem. It's called The Tree in the Midst. Long after they had lost sight of the couple, and the story that trailed after them, the cherubim kept glaring at the horizon, shrugging their wings at each other, and shifting their weight from fore to hind paws. Meanwhile, the unforbidden animals, Indo-hues, field mice, Persian ground jays, worms, salamanders, ants, and so forth, ate as always from the tree of life, and also from the tree of knowing good fruit from fruit gone bad, a knowledge the human animals had picked up by watching them from hiding. Only the eternally inexperienced one had never tried so much as a single deep ripe pomegranate arrow. It knew no more than the cherubim, that down among the butterfly weeds, the two trees become one trunk. And so it saw to it that the cherubim kept an eye out for the humans, lest they lose their taste for each other and the world, find their way back to the pomegranate, get fed up with living, and become one of them. This one takes its title from a Marianne Moore phrase. It's called Imaginary Gardens. From 4 fertilized inches square of potting soil in a nursery pot sticks a pink tag printed with a botanical and in quotes, a poetical name. Penstemon heterophilus, blue springs, and a promising description. Not a shy bloomer, truly luminous. Similar arrangements fill the alphabetical garden. But planted in our dirt-colored dirt, the blue springs, insensible to our stimulating hints and prompts, thinks of nothing in the red sequoia shade, but green. The leaves of our mite-free heirloom fuchsia pucker with gall fuzz, and our purple linaria was no more gopher-resistant than a celery stalk. Not ideal, but better, really. A garden's less intended than tended. We knuckle lava rocks into the clayey ground and daub it with worm-shat compost. Welcome the migrated Nile lily and poor man's orchid, and spade bay laurel sprigs back to the creek. In dread of a dry winter, we prune overshadows and rain on what droops or falls over or buds. And look, the warty fuchsias performing flamingo and purple martin lake. And the linarius found its way back somehow as a toad flags, an acrobatic tower of squat blossoms. They tickle me like those dusty toads outside the lip of the limestone cave, hopping over each other like pupils playing hooky from a dim room whose walls flicker with primary forms. Nest, octopus, padlock, into a morning where things wear articles and take plurals. The same goes for actual poems with real words in them, watered and propagated by generations of mouths, words with their own tangled roots and quirks. These poems will be more luxuriant than either the poet or the materials could have imagined. Yes. The next one is also borrowed a title from a tune by Bill Evans. It's called Blue and Green. Uprooted from a dream I miss but can't remember, by an alert trickle I must at some point have selected, I view in a rolling lurch a pair of notifications. A copper plaque commemorating the passing of Auk, not the last dead Icelandic glacier, just the first, to be read when the island has become a land of plaques, and a low-orbit image of a scorched patch in a curling green fir, a clarified tract of indigenous Brazilian rainforest creeping with cattle. I turn my phone face down and sigh back onto cloudless sheets with hospital corners face up, like somebody staring at a ceiling they don't see. That far-flung pair of notes, I'm thinking, is entangled in a faint planetary chord. The rainforest breathes carbon in and breathes out oxygen, so much that a fifth of Earth's every breath and of Auk's every last snow bubble is Amazonian. When rainforest is forced, it gusts carbon, which in a wandering progression resonates in glacial recesses, bleeding an unimaginably deep blue, a blue from deep before now. And as going down is like going in, a miles deep glacial core, a long playing record of millennial airs, is like the compacted round in a rainforest tree. The plaque is addressed to you in your present. It was sent from us in your past, who knew what and knew how, but not whether we kept what was happening from happening utterly. Well, we did know this much. Some of us, Comte, did what we did. My last one is named for a place in Oakland that's well worth a visit. It's called Chapel of the Chimes. Stepping temporarily off our walks of life, each of us passes the reader and finds our niche on the Oakland-bound 12 that'll make all its time points from Jack London Square to Jack London Square from MLK. My elegantly goateed neighbor, Eduardo, in the middle of his left and his right-handed knee pats what he calls a paradiddle, tells me you don't ever want to lose your rudiments. Pausing, he recollects Ornette's free jazz and wonders, was Don Cherry still alive? But it's my stop. And like a dovecote flying away from its dove, the omnibus leaves me blinking before the columbarium, a honey-boned, Alhambra-gardened crematorium designed in 1928 by Julia Morgan. A labyrinthine masterpiece remarkable for its 20-rank pipe organ, its carillon tower, unseen canary song, glass-stained chapels, and Gutenberg cloister, for its ghost ship plaque, its fountains plopping and palm gardens hot and close, for the remains of Bones Eli and John Lee, Boom Boom Hooker, but most to me for its shelves of leather-like tomes, fondly bookmarked with what looks like fringed silk, a many-chambered library, well stocked with old and bright new acquisitions of bronze cinerary burns. So the circles, now unbroken, what once outbronzed an imperial bust, an ode airier than perennials, pressed in an anthology, an essence of its amazing days. Who can forget Shelley's Ozymandias? Now holds the refined contents of the name engraved on its spine. But what happens when the reader goes the way of the black or the northern white rhino? Immortality's getting on. She hasn't been the same since eternity passed into disbelief. A song can outlast its smith on anybody's playlist, but it lives only in an impassioned ear. I may reach the age of reckoning. Meanwhile, I'll get down pat what Eduardo left me. Timed or free, it's all technique. Thank you.
Geoffrey O'Brien.
Thank you. It's nice to see you all. I'm going to read one mid-sized rant and then 3 little serenities. They're all equally angry, though, but glad to represent anger. The agent and patient are one. It is a time to be alive. The days shorter after being long, their pseudo-hours making depth less wide. We'll call this varying of the sky a happiness, only in the sense of constant event. The present form its history takes, a blue that broods with unusable capacity above those gray towers where everyone was born. To be from them is like looking out a body through the accidents of birth, on a grove of as yet still standing evergreens, only polysemy's accurate too, and thinking, too much this, not enough that, then turn your way. But it's only like that, the trees, buildings, the buildings metaphorical, the metaphors states, where one tries again to become a better prison, or at least a different one. There is as much access to the right spaces as the skies of country. Would now be a good or bad moment, of course it is, again, to mention what happens to a face over the course of the standard working day, a sort of gentle, total, absolute wildfire, consuming the least false world, as you realize a demand has never left off, so all thoughts neither chosen nor free, with nature their only context, worst witness. The sky, a textbook blue sequel to equality, to the place experience winters, where questions go after being answered, through the beaded curtain of our fate and out to expectation's family room, money, shit, and days again. Happy anniversary to that. And to any pleasure producing caesura in the spectacularly average flood of half-had days, I continue to give up, like a cathedral to the sky, to something short of purpose. The prison form its past gives unmet needs. The everyday dead workers carry on the backs of their commute to the other side of nothing. This gift for being pre-demise, an example of almost living, alongside the remoteness of any social distance, now come back to visit all of history, its judgment without content, on repeat, like the waves at night, their great moving right show. It's so old a game, being played out among the most basic things, you forget what you pay for. Those little wounds and pockets of damp, dark, nearly nurturing in their indifference to your presence there. The rest is war homes. When you wake, you hear the 5th line of the last quatrain Night was willing to sing about its being time, to repaint the burning house, about how utter day gets, exclusive of other charges. Waking, essentially what helps you know the earth again, its satin atlas, torn familiar, and a few trees between the persistent buildings, the strength of their candidacy. You can almost hear the sigh of sight as it settles its grip on the garden to produce a false steadiness in the picture of value. At such times, and others, I feel the part ruling gloves and the part it wants gone. These are often the same. I kick my altar and go on, connected and alone, drawing a bad wing across the face of chance, trusting the flat are round in other worlds. With no good-bad options, I day, a skyless cloud of the trauma in common, that misabundance, replete with person, low on cause. But these evergreens, proving growth is motion, but motion isn't growth. They aren't like buildings in that their going up refuses to take us in. If this sounds bleak, it's because it's sound, echo of the first tragedy to befall the mouth at hand. There is some good news, or would be, if it weren't again dusk, turning trees to rumors, huge with little love. The trouble in people isn't their own. See, if we were doing regular alphabet, it would have been dusk and that would have worked out. All right. This is about what happens to sunset under Trump. It's called The Conditions of Belief. How easily it goes down into how softly its replacement comes, shifting color through a line of clouds far enough to be unconcerned with those inside, the dome gone vulnerable, carnations brightest where their last forms drain to the edges of what thinking would like to think it looks like. Nearly nothing you can do about the stubborn air, spreading rust through peach towards repeat apocalypse. Before the holy blue hour, darkness will be freedom from. It doesn't have to be at all the way it totally is, but that's tradition for you. Every day, an open casket. Your eyes are about to close, so you can hear better the changing of the color guard, that they are and aren't, a fantasy of white in which nothing's much more than enough. That. The health of the cedar is its lack of opinion, sending silent fern-like fans of needles, green divided exactly as it this time did, loading branches up the proximate air. From that to this, going on being, a flight into illness, we have ruined space in making it only potential, especially at twilight with the men at the door. Again, sorry. Finally, even shorter, messenger. How far away are even the near? As far as lilacs from midnight, a baby from time. Night is time's infant, and so are the lilacs, opening like gifts for no one in particular. Together they form something more and less than retinue, doubling as both arrival and return, to be and be with the earth put here. Thank you.
Lyn Hejinian.
I'm choosing to read from a book that came out 19 years ago, a border comedy, when the notion of the border was different from the one that we sadly have to deal with currently. And the notion was that in fact, all zones of encounter are border zones, like in the space between me and Cecil, for example, border zone, and we're out of our comfort zone in the border zone. We don't know what the currency is, we don't know what the laws are, what the rules are, when we're all incredibly foolish. That's what this poem is about. And the rules of composition required that I be completely confused as to what I was doing throughout. And there was a technique for that, but I won't bore you with it. Okay, where am I? Got it. A story of our time would be hard to confess if confession is what it would take, and hard to declare as a good among goods, hard to have taken, knowing it lived, a winged creature, having the unstable identity of anything, and the steady state of the psyche producing it, always in the present tense, perhaps because of some paradoxical relationship that dreams have to experience, the contents of a dream having already been experienced, but being experienced in dreams as unexperienced, which prevents dreams from being finished and keeps life and dreaming looping their links and rattling their chains to frighten us with invasions of, but from your motionless face, I suspect you aren't listening, just reading without reference. The paranoid are afflicted with an overabundance of reference from which even the plenitude of the world is inadequate. So the language of paranoia lacks world enough to match, but here you come now with a cauliflower, while outside it, what is it? Snows, unless I'm just doubting the light. But here you come now with a mail. I too am keeping to my routine, just varying it enough to keep it out of view, going to different postal clerks to conceal the number of letters I send, or to different checkout clerks, so the frequency of my trips to the market will go unobserved. It's planning and privacy that are at odds when life is full of pleasure, producing work, producing pleasure, as we lose control. So let's keep up our evasive inconsistencies. Tonight should seem absolutely ordinary. Today must be normal to type it. We'll scatter to an outing on the ice, in outfits for skating in retaliation, taking to the unsocialized part, the part of the one who prepares for those arbitrary instances that common practice won't relieve. The precedence of the burden of the best experience anyone has ever had, slipping or taking one's odd departure at the private part, where ice meets water to reflect on chance in a single day, which is always a little one that shouldn't be taken abnormally as one's personal symptom or sign, but directly in sentences. It is only in sentences the vocabularies produce verbs as intimate word values or yellow sentence branches, and ship's pack and moon's canoe, every phrase and occurrence uncurtailed in an episode whose meaning, to quote Joseph Conrad, is not inside like a kernel, but outside, enveloping the tale, which brought it out just as a glow brings out a haze, meaning outskirts, no immunity from having lived, but not just that, from having lived at this time, at the edge of a wide angle, and way out on a long arm, like a flight of stairs winding down to the cellar, where the teller said to sit, in a spread of gossip, pressing her own case, with some stories of her own of a divine erotic bird who once shared her many anxieties, scattered seed, and pecked the ants that tickled her knees to keep her from laughing. And it was for that one day that she cut off his head, that she plucked him and turned him to soup or soot. There are different versions, some mild, some vicious, some lewd, and many of the details there just pass around the time through which we wait, poor in stories, events coming to us nowadays already shot through with explanation, which we cannot report as our own, but then the inexplicable, the about nothing, which we're allowed, might give us our story, which we won't fuck up, but think and leave continuous as the story goes. Joe Barnett may be sharing a home with Peter McHale, but she isn't about to share her life with him. Then Peter introduces her to his adorable little boy. She's glad to be alive and glad to have lived. But both Zarathustra and the ugliest man keep repeating, more. So she adds pins. That's normal. If you're a storyteller, your audience tells most of the story. I told one in which I described a high school in New York whose principal kept a two-headed goat, that every year before Thanksgiving, she would take the best math students to see. And some woman hearing my story said afterwards, I know that school. A cousin of mine went to it. And I expressed surprise I'd made up that school, but so had she. And we drifted apart as lovers might after realizing the wild inappropriateness of the ways they confided in each other. Since none of the points reached in this book require that we adopt one view of sentences, scenes of reason, rather than another, some sentences, such as, now that the lake is empty, it's light, and the geese are galloping away with it, make sense, but are not of this world. Some, such as, we've inspected wedding sites and hospitalized the paralegal, but no one can immigrate life's bread, introduce a new usage, transmuting into the transitive, the intransitive verb to immigrate. The possibility of creating new verbs often excites sentences. But that's the point. Come here. Did you mean me? Did you mean why? Thank you.
Hello. I'm going to read from two series. This is a dream poem from a book in progress called Negro Mountain. Negro Mountain is a real mountain in Pennsylvania where I used to live. It's the summit of Negro Mountain is the highest point in the state of Pennsylvania. It's a location of some controversy, and got an email yesterday from a friend in Pennsylvania who told me that the road signs, Negro Mountain, have been taken down. But since the mountain spans the Pennsylvania-Maryland border, they've only been taken down in Maryland. So in Pennsylvania, it's still, on the highways anyway, it's still Negro Mountain. Okay, so this is the sixth dream in this series. Sixth dream from Negro Mountain. Returning from where? In a hospital ship, approaching New York Harbor after months at sea. Confined below deck, but free to watch the crew, kitchen boys and nurses as well, out on the bow with their cell phones through my portal. We were coming in slow under zebra skies and glided right past the colossal Statue of Liberty, and the reek of diesel was everywhere. A smoky dawn, indeed. But in the dream, my situation was ambiguous. At once, I was ill with a complicated fever, and also simply returning to the hospital up the Hudson River where I had worked long before, where I'd used my old knowledge of the wards to move around inside. I could pass unnoticed, I understood, this ability or necessity being the frame of some lesson or subplot in which I was a double agent. In fact, I was a monster in the dream. Apparently narcissistic, though ill-featured and grisly, and talented, meaning predatory. Cherish your grudges, I thought, dreaming. Watch monsters. Waking, which is to say now, I think I'd probably been dead and was returning from that, it having been impermanent, death having been some location on a trade route, such in the dream's economy that could be reached by conventional water traffic. But in the dream, it was just a shallow business. That is, I'd come back willingly, but not jubilantly. Some based in memory, the observed moment on the bow, for example, but I was always to be the visitor. And two, I had helped set a trap for the monster I was. This split also a tiresome trope, and predictable. Predictable as well was that the trap a wooden shark cage, was obviously insubstantial. But as the visitor, I approached the cage eagerly because it was to have been baited with another of my kind, and I anticipated happily ripping it apart and freeing my comrade. But upon arrival at the cage, via a series of corridors that led me to an interior room in the hospital, I found it empty. By then, though, I was simply a white man. I was, by then, beyond disappointment, but was recognized immediately and detained in the room, confined once again, until a nurse came and I overpowered her and bade her keep quiet while I escaped. Leaving the hospital, I stepped into the street and began to run, knowing I'd be caught, the town being too small for me to melt in. Rivermouth town, low tide, just stinking up the estuary as I leapt from bridge to bridge, and began to compose a story that would free me, one that made reference to my doppelganger, the black criminal or servant, the faithful one, also of colossal proportions, but even so, dead of his wounds in the jungle, or perhaps it was only that he was a comedian, memorialized in the papers, having been carried off by fever like a pioneer, and how my white freedom would add value to his memory. Who was my host in this foolishness between land and sea? What horse was I riding? What crocodiles was this in the services of? Feeling the story's sham, not liking that as I stacked it together. And the next thing I will read is an excerpt from, or a series of excerpts cobbled together, we'll see how it goes, from it's a book called Train Music. It's an account of the railroad trip I took from New York City to Emeryville, Berkeley after Thanksgiving 2017. I rode 3 Amtrak trains, the Pennsylvanian, the Capital Limited, and of course, the California Zephyr. Accompanying me was my friend, the painter and collagist Judith Margolis. I had agreed to speak upon my return to California at a roundtable that was to address the problem of white supremacy. A roundtable that did not go well. Train Music will contain my words, its looping prose poem in many sections, and Judith's drawings and paintings from that same trip. The book is due to be published, barring incident, by Omnidon in 2021. So, Train Music. First day, Friday, November 24th, 2017. Last bits of dream of the night before in which I'd been invited to come see the river, and then later was swimming in a tidal pool or in the sea, and the light was such as it is. In bed, mattress on the floor, the evening that followed Thanksgiving dinner, New York City, Harlem. Having gone down the street then, St. Nicholas Avenue, singing on the way to the subway, that train, singing down St. Nicholas, how I used to love to watch her dance, that old grizzly bear. She's gone to Frisco, going to dance it there. Sour stomach, billy goat beard, pool of words to speak out of. Having come down old St. Nicholas, but still a cold water Negro, out abroad on Black Friday morning. Traveling. The schoolboys say, some traveling subject, typical power. Having agreed to address white supremacy upon my return to California at a round table. Symptom of what? My agreeable nature fidgeting over the tracks. On the street, in stations, unspoken of, standing water in ditches by the tracks. Feign my shock? Expect me, something said. Shark fin in the movies circling. Feign my shark. Water just standing there saying nothing. Remember me? Said something else. Insure me. Or gender me, boys, and let me dawdle. Poetry wars. Train music. Train music, as for me, just inevitable. This is itself some music. Double score. A binary proves its distance. A binary proves distance is out there. 1, 2, buckle my shoe. Double-tracked is one way in each direction. Shut the door some more, Charlie Brown. Trump me. A train covers distance. A train covers the distance. There's a bear in my bonnet. Dance the floor, bear. Send a farm boy out with a red rag to stop road traffic so the locomotive can ease over the crossing if you get my drift. The Harlem goat who coughed up 3 red shirts he'd eaten off a clothesline and flagged the train, which was fast approaching, was also Bill Grogan's goat and Riley's goat. Old song about the Irish. God will send a canoe, a helicopter, even an extra train flying a white flag to pull you from your fate. White is an extra train, not found in the timetable. Thank you.
Hi, thank you to Lyn and to Cecil and to Geoffrey and to John for inviting me to read along with them, and thank you to all of you for being here. I'm just going to read one poem from this book, which is recently out. It's a poem in kind of 14 shortish parts, and so I'm not going to do anything but pause in between parts. I think that'll be plenty. One note: there's a few bits, I guess towards the end, that I put in a few kind of early fragments from Gerard Manley Hopkins. So if it feels like all of a sudden a young Welsh Londoner from the 19th century about to be Jesuit takes over, that's why. So yeah, I'll just pause a little bit between sections. And it's called Capra Songs. As though we were parading certain deaths through a caring town, flatbed after flatbed of containers dragged north provide cover for every attempt. At some point, the perpetual cargo will, for even the most acute observer, mask disaster. No more so than when the freight cars ready to pass the impending commuter train. A flare left in the trunk. Every ramifying act nearly always sunk its aftermath. Easier in the days of sudden purchase and sifting wind. It took merely several cards and excess time to convince the holders of freight you were committed to banditry. As rain slowed, storms delayed every action that they could. A final meeting would determine how large the fire and how long the riot needed to slow the wary, inevitable flood. Each evening, its damage. Every song, its storm. The caught light you kept in glass flicked out from the door's odd angle. The misaligned jam, the dumb handle. Each noise taken in like an engine. When nearly done for, the story's at its simplest. Between the two of us, each key of Florida ticked and wavered. On a different spit of land, as categories thrill and are junked, a false spray of glitter over my head, and then a heavy stink like copper bowls rinsed again and again in their rainwater. The usual people will ratchet things, you'll break the copper-kept light, and the scene will close interminably. Every eye made bronze and each limb breathing. Several loves hours ago departed beneath the lake-staying sun. There are no ways to read among categories, especially now, when the sky is low and each of the hemisphere's furled strands cave in. Leave it to the footnotes to wrap themselves in a green core and fold away. Leave it to the ways that cash orbits the near skin. Regret architects these several days. All of us looked toward, then away from the scandal of happening. The forded song would eventually arrive, arranging its sequence of unclaimed things. There are among us faults and scars. The skin is all happiness, the evening all wreck. Each of the unraveling lengths are threaded with paths for no one, for none of us to take. Among what we do not know, a fecund realm. A falcon continues late above the grid, eyeing shifters, canals, their dike trash. Its set of eyes flagrant each day above the flood watch. The watermarks fill in towards the evening center, and every animal speculates its schedule. Throne of storms, departed gods have suffered the minor breakdowns that accompany evening's end. Any world can undo other worlds, just a bit like a river running its banks. These are always stories about a person, and I love and most love. About what might be met along a road of copper and riveted flowers. About what can be grasped from river stones as they forbid, then capitulate an unsaid course. Its game work is all slub and vain. The entire sight, a version of you I smuggle towards them. Or a palm of foisted shells set at the foot of the hawthorn. You'll do the same when it's your turn to run the numbers. Knock off early, listen to reef noise in the trees. Making an alternate set of sky passings could perhaps tell you something about last century's oceans or about the desperate knots in the last hour's skein of pavement. Tomorrow it's fire and tracery. Unfold the next pack of requirements and raise each glass past the moon's copper scrim. It only rarely works to imagine that there might be undone things. The shoals are finished, all of music and every tune, and so little happens. Slick algae among different shallows. Forget all that you know about rivers. Too late to notice, your earliest call is hours off and home is taken roots. The bones' location and their tilt toward home. Never a world for singing apart from this scene of chicanery. The way is barred by a scorn along the side of the far-seeing bay. And these are from gods, our penalties. The sun fringed at the edge of the world, the empty early dark. Forms internally damaged, returning background. Flocked world and sky dappled with diminished trees, spanned with shadow every one. These are not mysteries, but sharp attunements of the draining waste. October rings its shades. Well, you can't help but think back to those remoter actions that once saved ours and once grew rife. It may be, and most probably is, exactly half of what you'd like. Flowers and their near shot of bees, compost in earshot, all of our angled frames and fell tongues as we headed into the riving street and then went to cloud and ground. Divinity of air, you said. Each a dispersed collective that might, one would think, be able to find a perfect thing, to at least manage a little for God's sake, not to throw over. People sometimes never imagine their final lives. Or, if she considers the space, the city, the space where all of their changes could occur, then every person we might be could live in your apartment. They could stay in our bed. He could stare out the ever-estranging window while I slept. The two of them would be like what you told others pastoral was, the happy undead. There isn't a version in which all of this ends, or well. Each seeks from surfaces a bloom, or from stems diversions, or from love what it could. And finally, in every event, timidity, wakefulness, retching about the weather, making as though a catalog would save. Walk back your figures, your knuckled sequences, your stretch of imagined forest. It's makeshift happening now, among all that is gone. Just fuck you, Eric. Seasons disperse, and the breeze off the bay nearly no longer arrives. Thank you.
Thank you to the readers, thank you to the poets, thank you to all of you for coming. Buy a book, stay, talk to the poets, and come back later on this month to see and hear Ray Armantrout on the 26th of September. Thank you again, and goodbye.